I am here with Gry Worre Hallberg, who's the artistic director of Sensuous. Yeah, I'm very happy to have you here in Relational Spaces. It's super nice to see you again. And I thought we would just start by you introducing your project and maybe also where the project is right now.
Yeah.
I guess the question is, what is Sister Soap?
Yeah, sure. So Sister Soap is a performance group. It was initiated by me and my poetic twin sister back in 2007. And that's why it's called Sister Soap. And it's also a movement. So it's both a group that produces performances, but it's also a movement to which a lot of people feel related or feels that it resonates with them. And the reason for this is probably that our work, one of the reasons for this is that our work is based on a quite strongly articulated intention that is expressed in the Sensuous Society Manifesto. And the Sensuous Society Manifesto is a manifest that I wrote in 2008 as a response to the financial crisis and as a response to the ongoing ecological crisis. So the Sensuous Society Manifesto imagines a potential future world governed by the aesthetic dimension, as opposed to the dominating economic rationality of today's society. So it asks, what would the world look like if we had moved beyond the current dominance of economic rationality and into a future where the aesthetic dimension is the governing principle. And by aesthetic, I mean the sensuous and poetic, a more sensuous and poetic mode of being and being together in the world that is accessible within the arts. The arts is primarily based on this dimension, but the arts is to some degree exclusive, and therefore our intention is also to democratize the aesthetic or open the sensuous and poetic to as many people as possible. And then through our performances, we explore different aspects of a sensuous society. So in Sisters Academy, we explore education and learning and Bildung in a sensuous society. In Sensuous City, we explore the city and public space. In Sensuous Governing, we explore governance and so forth. We have also developed our own performance method, Sisters Performance Method, Sensuous Learning. So whenever new performers are involved, they find a poetic self, which is central to our performance method, not a fiction, not a character, but inherent poetic potential, or maybe the self of a sensuous society. If we were living in that society, the poetic self might be how we would be or express ourselves, because it would be that side of our self that would be nurtured, the aesthetic, the sensuous and poetic. So we also teach this performance method and run a 4-month program at Ryslinge High School where we teach this, and we introduce it to new performers and students and other people that participate in workshops where we communicate this method. And then you also said, maybe also touch upon where Sister Soap is right now. So right now our focus is on what we call anchoring and internationalization. But anchoring for us is how can we integrate and anchor what we do into everyday life. So that's both for the individual participants who might have participated in the work. In between the productions, how can they anchor the sensuous and poetic? It's for the performers, all participatory levels. But it's also, us as a group, as a movement, as a whole. Or you might say when we do our productions, sensuous society becomes manifest, and then in between productions it's dormant. It's still there, the vision, the intention, we can tap into it, but it's dormant until we produce again. But then now we have been granted a space in Hedehusene in the outskirts of Copenhagen that we call Sisters Hope Home, and we have received funding to transform this space into our universe. So we work immersively. So we transform spaces through light, sound, and set design, so it becomes this otherworldly space that you enter into. So we will transform this 350 square meters parcel house from the 70s into an otherworldly universe. And we are doing that right now. And then we open in October, and it will be a 5 years performance installation, durational performance installation. So the idea is that it's going to be open night and day for 5 years, and that you can always come at 2 in the evening from Tokyo, or at 6 in the morning before you go to work if you're a neighbor. You can come and you can stay for 2 years or half an hour. So it's a space where sensuous societies always manifest, and where we can always enter into a realm of the sensuous and poetic in this otherworldly scenographic universe that we create. And for us as a group, it will mean a lot as well that we have a space for this more permanent explorations, not so fractured as when you produce, pack up, pack down, pack up. It's a much more sustainable approach for us also right now, and it's completely in resonance with a new art paradigm that I suggested in my PhD that I defended this spring. The PhD is called Sensuous Society, Carving the Path Towards a Sustainable Future through aesthetic inhabitation stimulated ecologic connectedness. So the argument is that the sensuous supports a more sustainable future, and it does so because it evokes a deep feeling of connectedness in humans. And I then argue that we have moved away within the arts from spectatorship in many cases to participation. So we participate, and we have penetrated the fourth wall or penetrated the screen. So when in many cases art is not just spectated, people participate in it. But this participation is almost always temporary. So with this new art paradigm that I call Inhabitation, the idea is to inhabit the arts, to inhabit the aesthetic dimension, to inhabit the sensuous society, to inhabit the sensuous and poetic for a much longer duration of time. Inhabitation, inhabiting the arts. So that's something I'm very motivated by right now, to explore this in Sister Sopo at many different levels. And then we have also we have engaged in a partnership with the Danish Cultural Institute that has centers around the world, in Beijing, in Sao Paulo, in St. Petersburg, so Russia, China, Brazil, just to mention a few very different places in the world. And we have made a long-term, again this long-term thinking, a long-term collaboration to explore what would sensuous society mean in different parts of the world, such as China, Brazil, or Russia. So we are going to travel to all these places over the next decade to explore that, and also to evoke our ideas and vision of the sensuous society and how it can be manifest through performance art in these different parts of the world. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like a new blooming of something,
Yeah.
something new coming to life.
Yes.
Yeah. like for me, this inhabitation idea resonates a lot with this. Like, there's a lot of also in the stuff we do down here and like the workshop formats we do that provokes me in a way, because it's like people coming from life to experience something cathartic and then returning to life. And there's something in me that keeps wanting to make this life.
Yeah.
Like, how can the stuff we do in these intimate, relational, sensuous settings, how can that become the way we have our lives?
Yes.
And what you're doing and what you're talking about when you talk about inhabitation sounds very much like the performative world becoming life, at least for a 5-year period here.
Yes, exactly. And also I think it's so I think also the whole idea of a sensuous society, then society would have changed, and what you talk about would be status quo. That would be how people were living. But the path towards that can both be these inhabitory projects, which takes these exploration to the next level. But I also think these interventions that I would call what you're talking about to be valid, because they infiltrate into everyday life, and seeds are planted in participants and people, and it lives. So even though they exit the space, these seeds live within the participants, and you don't necessarily know where they are blooming in different contexts. So the process of society changing is also like the multitude of these interventions, in this case sensuous and poetic interventions, and people's response to that will begin to change in different contexts. But as I'm motivated to explore these longer term inhabitation projects, both through spaces, such as you have a space here, we will have Sisters Hope Home, also through the development of practices that people can integrate the sensuous and poetic within their everyday life very deeply. That's also anchoring of the experience in here, that it doesn't disappear because you go into everyday life. It stays with you, and then you begin to transform your surroundings, which is also very strong, I think. So you're not necessarily dependent on the spaces, because the potential lives within each individual, but it's evoked in these spaces. Yeah.
Yeah. You said practice now, and practice is a word that's really important for me personally, but also for relational spaces as such. This idea of what is practice, what does it mean to practice something, and what you just said also reminded me of this ideal I have for the work we do here, and I imagine that you hold some of the same for the work you do, that people come in to see a practice and learn a practice that they can then again bring to life.
Yes.
Bring into their life in their own way, like in their own personal practice.
Yes.
And the way I've experienced the Sisters Academy, at least, had this very particular beauty to it for me, where I come in as Peter and then I get to discover my poetic self. Which in my case was the longing, and then to bring him out. So it's like, I went in as Peter, and now when I'm out of Sisters Academy, I can choose to tap into the longing at all times, which feels like a deeply intimate and personal practice for me. But like, wow, I can experience the city or life through this sensuous, poetic self.
Yeah, that's very. I become very encouraged to hear you say that, because that's exactly the idea also with the poetic self, that it's owned by each body. It's not dependent on someone else to turn that on. Once it has been turned on, it's like you have to lit the flame. It was always there, but then it moves with you, and like you say, you can turn it up and down, and that's anchoring as well. So that's, like you say, the practice to integrated into everyday life, again, independently of surroundings, because otherwise we would all the time, be too dependent, like where is there a space that it can evoke, but the spaces can help us. They can, we can go into these places of intensified practice and then be reminded, or, go deeper, or learn how to translate. Until ultimately society might have changed altogether, because it does. That's the whole idea also with sensuous society. Society changes. It's not the same as it was 2,000 years ago. 2,000 years ago, we were not governed by the economic rationality, but by something else, So it does change. And also, sensuous society is not necessarily an end goal. It would probably be many challenges in such a society as well. But the argument is that the sensuous and poetic has been so under-prioritized, so that's why the longing is there in so many people, because it's a reparative process to be reconnected with the sensuous and poetic. And then maybe, after that we could move towards a more sustainable future, whatever that is, that values and appreciates all aspects of life, including the sensuous and poetic, which has been under-prioritized, and that's why I want to give voice to that aspect of life. And also we can see again and again in participants that the longing is there, and it's there for a reason. It's because it's a part of ourselves that needs expression, that we need to connect to. And also in terms of this ecological connectedness with the current crisis that we are in several crises, but the climate crisis as an overarching crisis, we could maybe talk about it that way. The ecological theory I read for my PhD, it was so interesting for me to see that there is this thread through all of it, where the key word is connectedness. So Bateson writes in 1972, Steps to an Ecology of Mind. The argument is there are many different ways to move beyond the ecological crisis, but the most important way is to train in humans an ecology of mind. And what is an ecology of mind? It's a mind that understands that everything is connected. Because when you understand everything is connected, you cannot destroy your surroundings. You would know it's self-destruction. On a deep epistemological and ontological level, you would know you are self-destructing when you are destroying your surroundings. And that's both on a social and environmental and mental level, And then when you read today Donna Haraway, Multi-Species Kinship, Astrida Naimanes, Bodies of Waters, it's connectedness. You're connected beyond humankind, you're connected to everything. Everything is ultimately made of stars. You must understand this, otherwise we cannot move beyond the environmental crisis or the ecological crisis. So again, it's connectedness. And when I studied the notebooks from participants in Sisters Academy, because that was my empiric foundation, so many talks about how they feel connected. And some people emphasize more connectedness to self, especially through the poetic self. I feel connected to myself, and that Gry would call that mental ecology. And some people emphasize, I feel so connected to people around me, a social ecology, right? And then also, I was a gobble 4 million years ago, so also this realization that the environmental ecology, I'm connected to everything, and everything is inside of me, and it's just cells moving around through this plant into me. And it was just such a treasure to find this as I was reading, because it was wow, you put people into a sensuous and poetic space, and what they find is connectedness. And what we need to move beyond the ecological crisis into a more sustainable future is connectedness. So the arts, culture, spaces to be more sensuous and poetic have a big role to play, I would say, in this transition into a more sustainable future. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a similar word, or a word that connects to some of the same stuff for me, is intimacy. The sense of really being intimate with myself as I move in the world, which is also connected to boundary setting and like what is it I want and don't want, and what am I consenting to. There's some clarity in it as a tool for being intimate with others, and being able to sense what is going on in others, and even to be with others. And I think similarly to you, like the response that we get here in relational spaces from a lot of the people that come here is this, like, oh wow, suddenly I feel more connected to people around me. And there's like this deep longing for connectedness, and just to like remove the distance somehow, or the sense of I'm alone in the world, or this atomized existence that many of us experience in, especially in cities, I guess. And there's such a longing to bridge that gap, and at the same time it's also like it's really difficult. Like we collectively don't really know how to do that, and I don't know if it's anymore or if it's yet. There seems to be like a deep need for ways of moving into more connectedness.
Yes, exactly. So the longing for the sensuous and poetic spaces might very well be a longing for connectedness without, you don't necessarily realize I have this longing to go into more sensuous and poetic spaces because I long for connectedness. We might not know that that's why, but it might be a very deep underlying motivation, because that's where there is a huge reparative potential. And you can feel that instinctually when you enter into these spaces, that process of repair is initiated. It begins, and it's soothing because it's reparative, it's healing.
There's a thing I'm curious of if you recognize in your work. Like for me, it's mostly related to when I do body therapy. It's like when I get a client. And this is one of my teachers speaking, but like it feels very real in my experience as well. But when I get a client, there's always two people present. There's the one that's longing and really wants something to release or to open or to be with, or just like letting go or just being, right? And then at the same time, there's the one that doesn't want anything to change, just wants to stay safe and stay within the comfort zone, and they always seem to be present. Like both of them are there, and I experience the same thing in my life and in my processes. There's a part of me that really wants to open up, and then when I have those experiences, quite often what happens is that I get overwhelmed at some point, and there's a need to close down. Like I need to get away, and I need to close it down again, and then when I'm there, the longing comes back, and it's like, oh, I really miss the connectedness. Does that resonate in your work?
It does. I think it's really interesting to hear that mythology in a way, like that some people in your practice put words to these kind of, you could almost call it different participatory positions in one person, that it's not necessarily only that it's in one entity of humans. There can be this friction in participatory positions. I have operated with a conceptual pair. I can't remember if we have talked about it previously, but a conceptual pair called the critical gaze and the devoted body. And this conception, I conceived that during a large-scale production in Sweden in 2015, a manifestation also of Sisters Academy, and it was just a I just registered that some participants are like devoted bodies, and some are more critical, like gazing from a critical distance. And also that the devoted bodies are more vulnerable, because in my experience, the critical gaze is quite trained in our part of the world and celebrated. It's a quite safe position, you might almost say in some context, to like place yourself at a critical distance, where it's much more fragile and vulnerable to choose to dedicate yourself or to devote yourself to the experience. And it's not as trained either. Maybe this critical gazing has been evolved because of some of the horrible things we have experienced with mass seduction, and what happens if we blindly follow and are seduced without like turning off our criticality, then horror appears or occurs. So there are very good reasons for training the critical gaze. But so I'm just asking, does it come with a price? This like training of our criticality, the price of the devoted body, or the ability to devote ourselves to the unknown. And so I think it's so I see these different participatory positions a lot, and I think it's really interesting what you say, because that's like the critical gaze and the devoted body in one person. Like there is this friction, this conflict, I think inherent in many people. I think that's recognizable to a lot of people. And I think my encouragement is also as like the frame keeper of these worlds, one of the frame keepers of these worlds, to evoke courage to explore the potential of the devoted body, because it's not something that is necessarily trained in so many other spaces. And I trust the intentions in this space. I trust the intentions, so I know it's okay to allow for the experimentation of devotedness, in this context. And then it can be a space to also explore that move or that gesture, as opposed to a critical observation from a distance, which might be very trained already, and we're not going to lose that, I think. And also the most interesting, I think, is a harmonious relationship between the two. And also that when I am immersed in an experience, I think also the way I think is deeper. So it's thinking, it's reflection, and it's even deeper because I allow myself to immerse in the situation. So it's not compromising my criticality in a way, it's just like opening even deeper levels of thinking and reflection, where the body is also like invited into that process of reflection.
Yeah, like what comes up for me is surrender. The concept of like something we work a lot with here is the idea of surrendered leadership. When we lead some of the practices here. It's like, well, I am leading, and the part of me who is a good facilitator is present, but he's also surrendered to the greater intelligence of what goes on in the group. So there's this collective intelligence thing that's happening all the time, and that can be tapped into if I slow down a bit and dare to listen, rather than going into like, I know how to do this, I've done this 1,000 times before. For me, that really creates some uniquely magical spaces where something new can go through, and where what inspired me to say this was like, I think better in that place. I'm able to do something I'm not usually able to do in those spaces.
Yes, and it's also like, if we return to Bateson and steps to an equality of mind, so he also says that his life work is actually an attempt to create a new epistemology, a new way of thinking about the world. But I think with performance art and sensuous and poetic spaces, it adds to that also the ontological level, like bodies being differently in the world. And of course, it's so interconnected, like mind and body is part of the same entity, and of course they are intertwined. So it's in a way when you kind of cater to both the ontological and the epistemological level. You expand as the space of understanding and knowledge production and of experiencing and reflecting upon the world. It's an expansion of that space. Yeah.
So how do we make invitations for this? I think that's a very interesting subject for me. It's like, well, we know that these spaces exist, and we know that they can be created and expanded somehow. And then the question is like, how do we make the invitation to make more people see that something new is possible here, or like experiment with it, or dare to step into connectivity or a more sensuous way of being.
I mean, I think for Sisters Hope it has been interesting and continues to be interesting to work interventionist. To both say there are spaces, everyone is always welcome, but we also go out into different everyday life contexts and intervene into these contexts, where of course Sisters Academy, the takeover, which is a format where we take over the leadership of an upper secondary school or of a youth school for 2 weeks and transform the school into a sensuous and poetic space. So in that way you reach out, you meet people that wouldn't otherwise have sought out a space like this, but they meet it, they maybe didn't even know it existed because it's not their path in life. It's not something that neither their teachers or the parents or friends offer. So I think, and another interventionist moment is of course Sensuous City and Sensuous Governing, where we go into political context, where it's also like infiltrating into decision-making processes, which again can begin to, maybe change the arena, which is accessible to many people. So I think intervention is a strategy in terms of outreach and in terms of like opening the potential of the spaces we create to as many people as possible, and to what we call to democratize the aesthetic. That has been and continues to be extremely important. So it's both like establishing the space, creating everything it needs, and letting it be an open membrane that everyone can enter, but also to go out and infiltrate this into other contexts and then say, and you can always come here, we're here, this space is here for you to return to this way of being in the world if it speaks to you, if it resonates, if it's doing something for you that is reparative, constructive, inspiring,
Yeah, what happens in me when you say that is like the many experiences I've had of participants saying, I didn't know I was missing this. This is the thing that something in me has been longing for, but I didn't know, or like I didn't know what it was I was looking for somehow. And the question that comes out of that is something like, how does, like we work a lot with the word relational, like being in relationship. How does relational and sensuous go together for you?
I think I understand sensuous as a very kind of basic foundational approach. So I understand it in continuation of actually Baumgarten's understanding, the aesthetic philosopher who, during the Enlightenment, when Descartes had just declared, I think, therefore I am, and like subscribe to human being or human beings being defined by their logical, rational approach to life as opposed to all other parts of nature, and that was distinctive for human beings. During that time, the Enlightenment, where that approach was celebrated so much, Baumgarten introduces this aesthetic, new aesthetic approach to cognition and perception. So he was saying, okay, when I'm reading poems, I'm not necessarily rational and logical. So something else is going on inside of me, and what is that? And then he borrowed, this aesthesis from the antique and like the sensuous and poetic approach to life. It's something else. So there is another hierarchy of perception, another mode of perception that's not understandable within this hierarchy of perception created during the Enlightenment. So it's just simply sensuous and poetic experience of the world. It's like a sensuous, it's like a way of perceiving the world through the senses. That's how I understand sensuous. And that we do that in a lot of contexts, when we eat a piece of chocolate and it melts on our tongue, when we're disturbed by the traffic noise, or when we touch someone's hands. Like the sensuous experience of the world is always inevitably there because we sense the world. But within the arts, that way of being in the world is cultivated. So that's like intensified. It's like the focus is on that way of experiencing and being in the world. And then when you put many people within such a space, then the relations within that space becomes based on the sensuous and poetic. So the sensuous and poetic is like foundational to like the creation of aesthetic spaces, and then people entering those spaces and being in relations creates like human relations based on the sensuous and poetic. And relations, especially with ecological theory, is also to the plant and to the carpet, and so we are in relation with everything, And Haraway would say that we are synctacular, so we are not only in relation, we are intertwined, like our tentacles are touching each other right now, And that's also why so many people turn to mushrooms actually and study the root nets, and because they're like there's no places where there is no touching point, and they are visible. You can see them, so yeah. Yeah, some thoughts about that. Yeah, that I haven't articulated before. So, but yeah.
Yeah, I think for me I think it's quite similar. Like relational for me is not only relationships to people, but it's how do I relate,
right,
from me, whatever that means, and to like the chair, to the space. What is it like to be here? And that has a sensuous element right now. It's like this space does something completely different from the room next door,
right.
and then expanding into there's also a you here, and what does that even mean? What is it like for me to be in this room with you? Okay, I have some thoughts about who you are and where you're coming from, and there's like some admiration that's present, and there's like some nervousness in the relationship, and like how do we know each other? Is it professional? Is it friendly? There's some categories that are in place. And then there's also like an embodied relation that like, my body is also here with you, and that has like it feels, there's like comfort and relaxedness, and then there's also some tension of the situation. There's so many layers of relating that is constantly possible to tap into. And all of those are sensuous as I understand it. But it's all something, or experiential at least, and those go very together for me.
Yeah. And that's also like the way, like when you think about it that way, that's like, when we analyze, we make things distinct, like separate them, but there's also just like you experiencing the totality of everything there is, So, yeah, and actually, you know, so this analytical distinction can sometimes also create separation, right? That we begin to distinct or make distinctions, which is also interesting in terms of like the feeling of connectedness, you know. So
yeah, I think there's like a clear that there is something about separateness being connected to making judgments or distinctions. It's like as soon as I know who you are and how you're different than me, if I relate to you in that way, there's very little openness and curiosity and like wonder in the relation. Like something I really enjoy about the practices I do and that we teach down here is like the sense of awe or wonder in like suddenly seeing another human being and being wow, just like wow, you're completely different from me, and also very similar in some ways, but there's still like this wow, there's a different human being here. That what's that like? Like what's it like to be for you? And that sense of wonder and curiosity is for me some like just some of the most fascinating stuff in the world to play around in. It doesn't even have to be human beings. It can also be
yeah. There was a performer who said to me when we do these eye-gazing exercises and talking about eye-gazing, that when you look into the eyes of someone, it's a universe. And I have been thinking about that ever since you said it, because it does literally look like a universe, you know. It is cosmos and it's really amazing sometimes to tune into that, like the eye can be a gateway into like the whole universe of like human being, you know. Each human being is a whole universe in itself and as valuable and the biggest treasure, you know. Life is amazing. Like all manifest life is just so incredible. Yeah.
That feels nice to be in that space with you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's like there's a part of me that just wants to stay there and disregard the talking part. I think I wonder if you have like an invitation to whoever is listening or watching this about your project.
I could say that like a very concrete invitation is that we are opening Sisters Hope Home in October, and everyone is welcome. It's there for 5 years, so at one point or another I invite everyone to come by and, you know, explore and inhabit the sensuous and poetic with us, you know, and also to know that it's a chance to come there and stay for as long as you want, you know, like pack a bag, come, stay, inhabit the sensuous and poetic, or come by and do it and leave and come back again, you know, but it's there for a long time, and that's very motivating and inspiring to me, and I hope it could be to a lot of other people as well. Yeah.
That sounds lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, like the metaphor I would like to use about both Sisters Hope Home and this place is this sense of a place I can return to. It's like there's life, and life is out there, and it's confusing, and it's urban, and there's so many things going on, and so many relationships, and education, and work, and children, and shopping, and it's all of that. And then there's these silent spaces, or sensitive spaces, or relational spaces where I can go and there's like, oh yeah, there's this part of me. Now I can feel it again, and then I can bring that with me into life, or bring my poetic self out there again, and have it as a background part of me that is there in life, and that seems to change a whole lot when I remember that, instead of being preoccupied with all of the stuff that's going on and how difficult it is to be me, and I just find that I can become so extremely self-absorbed if I don't go to these sensuous relational spaces once in a while. And
there's it's like a humble curiosity as well. Actually, there's something humble about it. I think I never thought about it that way, but it's true. It's like maybe I can't put more words on it, but it's true that it's what is it? Humble as well. Yeah, you open yourself to something beyond what you can control very much or know very much, and that's, in a way, it's the opposite of arrogance, and the best word I can think of is humble. Yeah, it's true. There's that aspect as well. It can be there, present.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. That's a very interesting way of relating to the world.
Yeah.
I don't know who you are.
Yeah.
Because that opens who are you?
Yeah.
What is this? What is going on?
Yeah.
It's going to be really exciting to explore together.
But thank you for inviting me and talking with me. Yeah, and being curious about what I do, and for showing me the space you have created. Yeah,
it feels exciting.
Yeah.
I'm also looking very much forward to visiting Sister Shop home.
Yeah.
Seeing what you're going to create down there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, thank you.
Thank you.